It has been said that the God of the Old Testament is a God of vengeance. I think this is something that we should explore. This is based on an amazing article by Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, article link below. At some point in time, Christians began distinguishing between the Old Testament God of vengeance and the New Testament God of love. This is a common belief in Christian predominant cultures today. It wasn't intentional, but unfortunately it has led to the deaths of countless Jewish people. Yet, even according to Christianity, they are the same God, the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament. Obviously, God can't change his mind, or we undermine all faith. Would you worship a God that in the future will change his mind and permit what he had previously forbidden? God is, by definition, faithful. He does not go back on his word. Yet, there are exceptions. In Christianity, there was Marcion in the 2nd century who thought otherwise. He thought that the God of the Old Testament and the New were different. He was branded a heretic by the church. And on this platform, there are today some Christians who go by a minority Gnostic view that the God named by the Tetragrammaton is Satan, and that basically Jews and Christians, for that matter, who see in the Tetragrammaton a legitimate designation of God, also worship Satan. Yet we know that God forbids vengeance. He commands forgiveness, just like Joseph forgave his brothers, and we ask him to forgive us on our holiest day, Yom Kippur. To quote Maimonides, our greatest medieval commentator, as long as one nurses a grievance and keeps it in mind, one may come to take revenge. The Torah therefore emphatically warns us not to bear a grudge, so that the impression of the wrong shall be wholly obliterated and no longer remembered. This is the right principle. It alone makes society and human interaction possible. But what do we make of passages in the Torah like this? I lift my hand to heaven and declare, as surely as I live forever, when I sharpen my flashing sword, and my hand grasps it in judgment, I will take vengeance on my adversaries and repay those who hate me. Rejoice, O nations, with his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants, and he will take vengeance on his enemies, and make atonement for his land and his people. Let's always remember a principle of the Torah is that it speaks in the language of man, and we should keep that in mind. We're going to look at 3 thinkers, one German, one Jewish, and the other a Christian theologian of Croatian descent. First is Jan Assmann. As I said, he's a famous German Egyptologist who said that there is a fundamental difference between the Hebrew Bible and other ancient civilizations. In others, the human king takes on the attributes of God. The anger of the king is the anger of God. He's doing the God's work, so it is religiously sanctioned. In the Hebrew Bible, by contrast, there is a profound and unbridgeable distance between the human king and God. Anger is theologized and thus transferred from heaven to earth. What about Henry Atlan? Atlan argues the best way to rid the world of the violent sacred, as he calls it, is to reject it onto a transcendence. The transcendence of violence results in it being expelled from the normal horizon of things. Vengeance is then removed from human calculation. It is God, not man, who is entitled to exercise it. God may command it, such as against the Midianites and the Amalekites, but once prophecy ceases, as it has done since the late Second Temple times, so too does violence in the name of God. And what of our third thinker, Miroslav Volf, a Christian theologian, also agrees with this analysis and adds that in a world of violence, we are faced with an inescapable alternative, either God's violence or human violence. He adds that most people insist on God's non-violence, cannot resist using violence themselves or tacitly sanctioning its use by others. They deem the talk of God's judgment irreverent, but think nothing of entrusting judgment into human hands. And so violence thrives, secretly nourished by a belief in a God who refuses to wield the sword. Now, Wolf is probably best known for a book called Exclusion and Embrace, a theological exploration of identity, otherness, and reconciliation. It won the prestigious Graumeyer Award for Religion in 2002, and Christianity Today included it among its 100 most influential religious books of the 20th century. A native Croatian whose theology was shaped by the experience of living and teaching in the former Yugoslavia throughout the ethnic wars of the 1990s. Real confrontation with violence makes one think differently about human texts. And he states, and I quote, My thesis that the practice of nonviolence requires a belief in divine vengeance will be unpopular with many Christians, especially theologians in the West. To the person who is inclined to dismiss it, I suggest imagining that you're delivering a lecture in a war zone. Among your listeners are people whose cities and villages have been plundered, then burned and leveled to the ground, whose daughters and sisters have been raped, whose fathers and brothers have had their throats slit. The topic of the lecture: a Christian attitude to violence. The thesis: we should not retaliate since God is perfect, non-coercive love. Soon you would discover that it takes the quiet of a suburban home for the birth of the thesis that human nonviolence corresponds to God's refusal to judge. In a scorched land soaked in blood of the innocent, it will invariably die. As one watches it die, one will do well to reflect upon many other pleasant captivities of the liberal mind. And what of the Jewish people? One only has to think of the Jews of the Middle Ages who saw their fellow Jews accused of killing Christian children to drink their blood, of poisoning wells, desecrating the host, and spreading the plague, and then murdered en masse in the name of the God of love. We still hear their responses because they are recorded for us in many of the lamentations, the kinot, we say on the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, one of our commemorative days. Did they appeal to God's vengeance? Yes, they did. They appealed to his sense of perfect justice. But did they seek to take revenge or vengeance? No, they did not. They left that to God, for his clock is different than ours. God waits, and his waiting may not fit our ideals, but it is perfect and true. What our job is to live, affirm life above all else, and seek no more than the right to be true to our faith, without fear, without being coerced into another faith, but to live according to the precepts of the Torah. We are not meant to take what solely belongs to God. And what happens when we take revenge? Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks ends by saying, we will find ourselves in the condition of humanity before the flood, when the world was filled with violence, and God was grieved that he had made man on the earth, and his heart was filled with pain. Vengeance belongs to God. It must not be practiced by human beings in the name of God.